I first saw the stars when I was 13 years old. I don't mean that it took me that long to figure out that the stars are up there and the ground's down there. I mean, I was 13 years old when I first could see the patterns, the constellations in the night sky. It was a book that changed it all for me, H.A. Ray's The Stars, A New Way to See Them. Before then, I had inherited my father's ability to never be lost, for, as he put it, no matter where we looked, we could probably make a Big Dipper out of that pattern of stars. Now, speaking of stars, I'd like to try an experiment. I'd like all of you to close your eyes and imagine the last time that you saw a clear night sky from your home. Okay. Now, by a show of hands, how many people saw about a dozen stars? Okay. How about 100? All right. 1,000? Wow. How many people saw the Milky Way? Okay. Sadly, that is pretty typical. We live in an obscuring sky of our own making. This light pollution or sky pollution hides and discolors the night sky that our ancestors truly enjoyed. On a typical night sky from the city, you might see 50 stars. From the suburbs, perhaps 1,000. But far from the effects of humankind, on a clear moonless night, you might see 5,000 stars. The scale of this loss is staggering and accelerating, and it's hard to put into words. For some perspective, consider that you can see a mountain like Mount Washington or Denali or Rainier from about 100 miles away. Now imagine that the air is constantly so thick and so hazy that you could be within a mile of the mountain and not even know it was there. This would change the scale of our world and our relationship to it. And the sky is no different. The sky has been with us across the globe and through time. 1,000 years ago, for example, Pacific Islanders moved from one island to another island they had never been to and could not see beyond the horizon, using only the glittering stars as a navigational aid. 400 years ago, Ojibwe families used the patterns in the night to move from their winter camp to their spring camp. A little more than 100 years ago, tortured Vincent van Gogh looked out his window in Saint-Remy and created a masterpiece that we still enjoy. And a little more than 40 years ago, a precocious 13-year-old stepped out into the cold Michigan night and, looking up at the night sky, realized that she would become an astronomer. The night sky is at once the grandest and most ephemeral of natural resources. Like other natural resources, it guides us spiritually, artistically, and scientifically. Every culture that ever existed has placed names of importance onto it, much the same way that we do on the ground. It's particularly human that in our finiteness, we place things of importance into the permanence of the night sky for those yet born. In a real sense, the night sky has its roots in our past, with its branches ever reaching for future generations. And its loss represents something of the loss of ourselves. Let's consider again the night. From here, about midnight, say. Say you could find a secluded spot and face about southeast. You would see a few stars, and perhaps you would recognize some of the brighter ones, Orion, for example. You might see some other brighter stars that you wouldn't recognize but still had importance to our ancestors. now moved to a more secluded site. Thousands of stars are now visible, as is the great swath of the Milky Way, which was known by many names: the backbone of the night, the great sky road, the night river. We humans are great at recognizing patterns. We're even better at creating patterns and placing significance on them. If you pick up a typical star chart, you will see some marking of the recognized modern constellations of today. These constellations have been codified by the International Astronomical Union, the body that's tasked with the naming conventions of everything that's outside the Earth. And while those conventions are useful, they hide the many histories and heritages of the night sky. So let's take a look at one constellation. Let's start with Orion in particular. Orion is often people's favorite constellation, partly because it's bright, and partly, let's be honest, because it kind of sort of looks like what it's supposed to look like. It's not necessarily true for many of the constellations in the night sky. Now, the naming convention for constellations has been based on ancient Greek and Roman mythology. The naming conventions for the brightest stars, on the other hand, have Arabic origins, although sometimes the translations haven't been quite accurate. Betelgeuse, which is the bright red star in the shoulder of Orion, comes from a transliteration of Yet al-Jawza, the left hand of the central one. But apparently, a few centuries ago, some monk somewhere changed a Y for a B, and so we have Betelgeuse. Rigel is a shortening for the name of the foot of the central one. Many of you will recognize the three belt stars of Orion, but perhaps are not familiar with the names of the stars: Alnitak, Alnilam, and Mintaka. In fact, Orion has many names, as does its stars. The oldest record that we have for Orion as a recognized group of stars is a 35,000-year-old carving on a mammoth tusk. It's amazing. In the millennia since then, the Sumerians saw in these stars Gilgamesh, the Babylonians the shepherd, the Navajo saw the first slender one. Others saw Shiva or Osiris or Nimrod. The Chinook saw a canoe chasing salmon. The Yokut saw 3 footprints in the snow. 3 kings, 3 sisters, 3 zebras. It's very human to put something of ourselves in the cold winter night into the sky. Still, other peoples made grand constellations of great significance. The Ojibwe connected stars with Orion and neighboring constellations to create the Great Wintermaker next to the Great Panther, which both told us when a season would end and begin. The Lakota would use the 3 belt stars as part of the great spine of the bison just south of the Bear's Den. And meanwhile, in Romania, the stars of Orion represented the celestial throne of Christ in the heavens. For me, it's impossible to imagine the utter joy of that first person that puts something of themselves into the permanence of the night sky. The closest I can come is moving away from my familiar Midwestern sky and going somewhere where I can see something new. The first time I saw the Southern Cross from Panama, or the Northern Lights in Iceland, I was moved to tears for wondrous joy of the universe in which we live. This is our heritage. It belongs to all of us, but sadly, fewer and fewer people can access it. For example, 10 years ago, only about 20% of Americans could see the Milky Way, our home in the cosmos, home to 100 billion stars and perhaps as many planets. Today, that number is 1%. the Milky Way is so alien to so many people that in 1994, when LA was plunged into darkness because of blackout, 911 calls were made because of a mysterious glowing cloud above the city. These days, most Americans live under a heavily polluted sky, a 7 or 8 on what's known as the Bortle scale of sky brightness. And we live, on average, 150 to 200 miles away from a pristine sky that our ancestors knew only 100 years ago. And the situation's getting worse. The sky is getting brighter faster than population growth, so we're over-lighting the sky. Now, you may well ask, so what? Isn't this the price of modernization? What have we really lost if we can light our cities at night and be safe from the darkness? Well, as an astronomer, you might guess that I have a particular opinion on the matter and a fairly sharp axe to grind. But light pollution actually impacts a lot of our life. Excess light, which is light that goes where it shouldn't go and where it isn't needed, of course, wastes energy. These days, many cities have made the switch to LED lights, which are more energy efficient, but that is meant, and you can probably guess the punchline before I get there, more lights on more of the time. Excess light has also greatly hurt wildlife, affecting migration and mating and leading to overpredation of insect species, threatening fragile ecosystems. We ourselves evolved under a dark night sky over millions of years, and its loss has dramatic and negative health impacts. Now, you might think that excess light is good for safety, but it turns out that studies have shown that it's at best unhelpful. Those LED lights that I mentioned earlier are brighter and bluer than their counterparts. This has led to increased glare off wet and icy roads. Those of us of a certain age might remember those blue blocker commercials from the 80s. Anybody? I'm here to tell you they were onto something. In cities, too, we often use unshielded lights to expose threats in the public. But anybody who's had a flashlight aimed at their face knows that a bright light can hide as much as it reveals. Use a hooded light and put that light where it's supposed to go, and it does its job. To me, nothing encapsulates all of this more than this photo of a few human beings in the Midwest attempting to celebrate their celestial heritage on Earth Day 2021. In fact, it was Earth Hour, the only 60 minutes in the entire year where we celebrate the dark of the sky by turning off all unnecessary lights. Evidently, we have different definitions of unnecessary. So what are we supposed to do? Give up? Of course not. That's why I'm here. There are groups working right now to save the night sky, to reclaim the night. The International Dark Sky Association is one such group. It's working with individuals and communities to help people make decisions about how and when and where to place light. We need to ask ourselves, do we really want to have our lights on at home all the time, at the office, in the community? We need to ask ourselves, how much of the night do we want to leave to future generations? The IDSA, in partnership with other organizations, has found at least a partial answer: the creation of dozens of dark sky preserves across the country and across the world. Every year, there are more. These are areas that are dedicated dark sky sites that are to be preserved in perpetuity for future generations to enjoy. We can do this. So, I've come here today not to deliver a eulogy for something that has been lost forever, but to raise a call to arms, to fight to bring back the night. I'm here so that the next 13-year-old that walks out into the night and looks up doesn't have a sense of profound loss, but has the same sense of awe and joy I did when I looked up that first time, and you can have when you look up, because the night sky is the one natural resource we all can enjoy simply by stepping outside our own homes and looking up.